We're forever asking ourselves now, why did this country, this beacon of freedom, run off the rails? Prosperous country, where we could speak our minds and exchange ideas. Now we're afraid to speak. Every day the rules change. You can say this, but you can't say that. The next day, you can say that, but you can't say this. We don't know anymore. This country has been run over by socialism. When did it start in this country? Well, it was introduced into this nation by FDR and Hollywood. Hollywood adopted it because the people who run Hollywood, people that we admired, people that we thought were good, moral, religious people, became heads of communist organizations in Hollywood, believe it or not, and instilled it into the movies and entertainment that we see. That's why we've adopted socialism a little at a time. Began with the Social Security system, and then the New Deal, which the intention of the New Deal was to bring back the freed slaves, or bring the freed slaves to the Democrat Party from the Republican Party. Poor people to the Democrat Party. Why did that happen? Why did they move? Well, the Depression, we had a depression, and it went on for far too long. In fact, it was FDR that let the Depression go on longer than it should have gone. And so people became disillusioned with capitalism and started to embrace the state. The state handed out food. The state gave you a job. If you were poor and you lost everything in the crash, people that you knew committed suicide because of the crash. Capitalism wasn't working, was it? We must embrace the state and make the state our parents. But capitalism, that isn't what happened. FDR intentionally made the Depression last so long that people changed parties and embraced the spoon of poison, first spoon of poison of socialism. Now, FDR, many of you may or may not know, he was fascinated by fascism. And he sent a little group they got together called the Brain Trust over to Mussolini's Italy because the state ran everything, the ways and means of production. Though Mussolini's Italy was a little different than Nazi Germany, though they're both forms of fascism, but they're all forms of socialism. They're all forms of communism, dictators. In Nazi Germany, of course, you had to put the Nazi Party first, just like fascist Italy. Mussolini did make the trains run on time, and he did connect all the city-states and made everyone learn the correct Italian. See, each city-state couldn't understand each other. Everyone spoke a different dialect. Towards the south, they spoke an Italian that was mixed with Arabic because they had been plundered from the year 800 to the year 1300 by the Saracenites coming from Egypt. So the vowels dropped off the ends of the words and it became mixed with Arabic. So Mussolini made everyone speak the correct Italian. Mussolini wasn't against the Jews. He didn't put anybody in concentration camps. It was a little different. In Nazi Germany, Hitler said, if you don't put the Nazi Party first, if the Nazi Party is not your God, then we're against you. Jews, not all Jews, some Jews actually fought with the Nazi Party because they decided to put the Nazi Party first. But he rounded up gypsies and homosexuals because they didn't put the Nazi Party first. They had a different way of life that they wanted to live. They wanted to think for themselves. They wanted freedom to live independently. But it didn't work with Nazism, so they went into concentration camps. Catholics as well, that didn't want to put the Nazi Party first, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Not just the Jews, but there was a great number of Jews, the greater part were the Jews. And it was Stalin himself that sent a letter to Mussolini, not to Hitler, saying to Mussolini, "You implemented socialism perfectly." Why would he say that? Isn't the Soviet Union communist? Soviet Union is the United Soviet Socialist Republic. It's socialist. Nazi, what does it mean? National Socialist Workers' Party. In the center of the sandwich, socialist workers. Doesn't that sound like communism? Of course it does. Different form of communism, but it is, and it killed millions of people. National simply means Germany. That's all it means. So to be a nationalist means, the true definition, Google has changed it, but the real definition is you're a patriot, you love your country, you love your country's values. That's why you fight and die for your country. Because there are some countries whose values are not good and don't have certain freedoms. So you fight for your country. That's all it means. Well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt also appointed the first open member of the KKK to the Supreme Court. He also, to pass the New Deal, it was very important to bring all these poor people and freed slaves to the Democrat Party, the party of the KKK, the party of slave owners. You had to bring them back, so you made them suffer and starve to death and die under the Depression by passing the New Deal. And how did he pass the New Deal? Well, it was signed in blood. How is it signed in blood? Well, the Democrats didn't want to sign it unless he promised that lynching would not be outlawed in the South. So they signed it. He said, yes, all right. So over 4,000 people were hung in the South, lynched by the KKK, the Democrats. Democrats went out at night to round up to put fear in former slaves and anyone who was against the Democrat Party. So 1/3 of that north of 4,000 were white Republicans. That's something that should be passed along. White Republicans as well as Italians. They called them coons because they considered them half black, and coons meaning raccoon. They considered them animals. And in New Orleans, they blamed them for the chief of police getting killed. So the largest mass lynching in American history occurred in New Orleans, and they were all Italians. They hung them up and pulled their bodies apart and decorated the city with their body parts, and then people took the body parts and brought them home as souvenirs. That's what happened. So there are a great many people that did suffer alongside the former slaves. But the interesting thing is, yes, the former slaves and descendants of slaves had a unique experience and suffered deeply in this country. And it was the Democrat Party that brought welfare to them. Welfare, put a caveat in there where the father couldn't be in the home, destroyed the African American family. Before that, they were working harder than white people were. They were moving up in society. They were intact families, went to church every Sunday, and the illegitimacy rate was 10% in the African American community, while in the white community it was 30%. But when you destroyed those families and they no longer were going to church together, and the girls weren't being taught a man should respect you, don't let him touch you until he marries you, and he promises to be with you for the rest of your life. Don't let him touch you. These values were instilled in them, but they were taken away. And no woman in the African American community or a woman who was poor could, no matter what color they were, could think that a knight in shining armor, the love of a fairy tale that little girls read in fairy tales, she could not hope for that. The most she can hope for is to get pregnant, to have a child, but the father can't live in a home. So the entire community got very depressed, and drugs were pushed in that community, and that destroyed it. But thank you to the Democrats for doing that. And Lyndon B. Johnson said, also a member of the KKK in the 60s, once we sign this, we're going to have those blanks voting for us for the next 200 years. Well, something else happened in the 60s. Anne Ray Mercuse came over from the Frankel School. Well, the Frankel School used to be called the School of Marxism, but never mind trivialities like that. And he instilled the idea of leisure, that the state will provide your work, and every man and woman must have leisure time. Well, this sold very well with the hippies because they were hallucinating and experimenting with all sorts of mushrooms and recreational pharmaceuticals. It was like shooting fish in a barrel to instill this into them. Little did they know that there was no way in that system that they could move up. They had to stay where they were, poor. And like in those countries, if you were weak, sickly, or old, they didn't provide you enough food because the state controls the ways and means of production. And the state only makes so much food. They took over the farms. Every industry was controlled. And they only made so many of everything. And you had to stand in line to get it. And if you were at the end of the line, you didn't get anything because the state only made so much. So the sickly who couldn't stand in those lines and the elderly and disabled, well, they just starved to death. And then you culled the population and made them stronger and ready to fight in a war. Very good. But the hippies didn't have any foresight. They had hallucinations, but they didn't have foresight that the utopian dream would end up enslaving them and killing them. So these people ended up becoming our teachers, journalists, field academia, Hollywood. It already started in the 30s in Hollywood, slowly in the movies. You see, the unions in Hollywood voted in presidents, which we thought were religious and moral people. We looked up to them. Yet it was they that betrayed us, because they started to instill the ideals of socialism, the socialist utopia, in all the films, our entertainment before. There was TV, there were the movies, and then there was TV. That's why the idea of socialism sounds so good, because it was instilled in all these fairy tales. A movie, anything happens in a movie, it's a fantasy, it's fake, it's a lie. Yet when we see it on the big screen, we're engrossed in it, and we think that this is good, this is gonna work. But it doesn't. Someone else came along in the 60s. His name was Saul Alinsky. Hillary wrote her thesis on him, and she wrote him letters. He was one of her mentors, along with Robert C. Byrd, the grand exalted cyclops of the KKK, whom she kissed and Bill and Obama eulogized. And Obama put his statue in the Capitol Rotunda, the highest place of honor in the nation. He died in 2011. So if you think the KKK members are running around in the Republican Party or are connected to Trump, you're wrong. You're wrong. Saul Alinsky says that the sins that you have, the faults you have, blame someone else for the crimes that you are doing. Blame them as long as you blame them first. As long as you call racists first. See, they always call racists first. That means you're not the racist because you're telling everyone else they're the racist. So they don't look at you. They don't look at the Democrat Party, and no one realizes that's the party of racism, and it still is. And it's still racist. Doesn't matter what color that they're raising up or lowering. It's racist. So our legislative branch, well, particularly the Congress, I was going to say the communists, the Congress, that should be voting. People gave them money. They voted for them. We voted them in so they would help us. They would help our lives, make things easier, make us stronger, make us more prosperous. Instead, they're obsessed with taking Trump down. The faults that they're doing, they're the ones who colluded with Russia and the Ukraine. It was Hillary that gave the dossier, had the dossier written for $9.5 million. They're the ones, Brennan, who voted for the Communist Party in 1976, who was Obama's head of the CIA director, flew from Italy to the Ukraine on a fake passport. I wonder what that was all about. It was them that colluded. It wasn't Trump. But nevertheless, always blame someone else. And Trump, they blame him for so many things. It is them, and we don't even know who they are. Remember that little fund, the fund that they've paid out, we found out about 3 years ago, $18 million. Now it's north of $18 million. I'd say it's between 20 and 30 million. That they paid out to victims of sexual assault by the senators and the Congress. And they made the victims sign a piece of paper saying that if I say a word, I go to jail. So they shut up. So these people who are sitting there doing nothing but trying to take Trump out of office are guilty of those heinous crimes. And the Me Too movement should march right through the Senate and Congress and start yelling at them and stop screaming in the streets with pussy hats on their heads because Trump got elected and not Hillary. You see, the ones who have the gravest faults, we don't know. And you're electing them back in, aren't you? You're giving them your money, and they're doing nothing but trying to take down Trump. Oh, but you think that's a good thing by any means. But this man, no matter how much you're throwing at him, this country, we're down to 3.5 unemployment. More women, more African Americans and minorities are employed more now than any time in history. And that's just one of the great things he's accomplished. In fact, the Congress, there's a bill that should have been finalized that everyone agreed on to lower prescription drugs. Everybody's yelling about how prescription drugs are so high. Well, they should be passing that bill to lower the cost. They have it, but they're not doing it. They're just obsessed with taking Trump down. That's all they're doing. They're a bunch of juveniles throwing a tantrum as if they've never experienced hormones for the first time. And there's another bill to renegotiate NAFTA, which would bring 160,000 more jobs to this nation, to low-skilled workers, people who couldn't make it through college or didn't go to a trade school. They could have a job, but they're doing nothing but trying to take Trump down and fabricating everything. All they're doing, this is my crime, this is their crime. They take off their name and they put Trump on it. Trump didn't do it, they did it. They're just peeling their name off and putting his on. That's a Saul Alinsky tactic. Now, other than Saul Alinsky and FDR did, there's something that happened in this nation. 1970, there was something they used to teach in school. They don't teach it anymore, but it stopped in the 1970s. Civics. Civics taught you the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And the preamble of the Constitution is the mandate of our nation. And no one in Congress, or very few in Congress, really know the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and have adopted it in their hearts and kept those values of freedom. This is why we're prosperous. There is no form of government that has made their people more prosperous than capitalism. Socialism, totalitarianism, or monarchy doesn't do it, or the caste system of India. It's when capitalism was injected into India, finally people who had been kept in a lower caste system, if they got an education and made money, you're seen as equal to the top of the caste, which are the Brahmins. Very interesting. This is a critical flaw, that we weren't taught these things. Because this is why we were admired and respected around the world. It tells us who we are, why we are, and gives us our national identity. And without that frame, which gives us our values, that stands behind the Bill of Rights, we're just floating in air, and our sectors of society are not connected. The assumptions of the left and the right are all skewed and wrong. We have to find areas of agreement and areas that we share. And we do share the notion that education accomplishes certain things. It turns students into citizens before it's their turn to run the country. It teaches them how to run the country and the values of this nation. People come here without the values of this nation, but that's why they came here. What do those values teach? It teaches that opportunity rises with mobility, merit, and freedom. And if you don't want that, you came to the wrong place. You don't get a pass by having been born here. You have to learn it. We must learn the 10 Commandments. We don't know them at birth. And we have to learn our values. For if we don't, we are fatally wounding ourselves, and we can't combat ideas like the values of ISIS and the like, because we don't know our own, and we have to. The Preamble is the mandate of America, and every parent, teacher, and political commentator should stand behind it and sign it as a gesture of support and bring it back from that action. Bring it back to the grades below high school, thereby bringing attention to those who need to hear it.